And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB. They're honoured to be awarded the Best Trade Finance Bank in Africa at the Asian Banker Middle Eastern Africa Finance Awards 2024. Good evening. Welcome to the program. I'm Stephen Grootes. Glad you're with us this evening. It seems that the Springbok, and you can imagine why, the brand attracting new bidders all the time. News today about another consortium that's keen to buy us maybe up to 40% of the commercial rights of the Springboks. They'll use a special purpose vehicle to do it. We'll speak to one of their people in just a moment. Lots of talk about this. Would, of course, maybe allow you to buy a stake in it too, through some kind of special purpose vehicle. Lots of questions about it too. There is an economic model that rugby unions, provincial rugby unions, have run for years to fund themselves. It involves often sort of season tickets, people who buy at the beginning of the year, sometimes for 10-year periods. In some cases, stadiums have been financed by people buying a sort of 30-year right to a ticket. And with that, they go to every provincial game, and with that would come the right to be first in the queue when, for example, there is a big international that the Springboks are playing in. There are all sorts of questions about the financial models of these things. Doesn't mean that would necessarily change. Doesn't mean it would stay the same either. I think there are big questions to ask of Barlow World tonight. Their share price up 15% on the day. That's because of the Middle East consortium and the offer that they've made for this. And it seems that they're offering an 87% premium on the current share price. And you can't ignore that, can you? But the question really is about the CEO, Dominic Sewela. He's been on this program a couple of times, of course. And he is part of the consortium. Now, let me just be very clear. The company says that they've taken steps to manage any conflict of interest. I must say I would like to know a little bit more about that because he's the CEO and he's involved in this buyout. I wonder if maybe we need a few more questions about this. The journalist in me is simply saying, what kind of steps have you taken and how have you done it? And is he still acting as CEO? How do you know whose interests he's acting in? Yours as the company or the consortium that wants to buy the company? I mean, there are all sorts of questions around a conflict of interest here, and I don't think they're going to be resolved very easily. I wonder how the members of the Monetary Policy Committee, I wonder what they were doing when they saw today's inflation figure. They would have known, of course, it was coming. And I'm talking about the debate about whether their last decision should have been 50 basis points reduction in November or not. Because for the second month in a row, consumer price inflation is below the inflation mandate of the Reserve Bank. That's between 3 and 6%. Inflation for November coming in at 2.9%, was 2.8% in October. Now, some of this is around what they call base effects, where the price was last year. Egg prices, for example, were very high as a result of avian influenza. They are normalizing now, so there's been, would you believe, egg deflation. Eggs are cheaper now than they were a year ago. That's not going to happen in a month's time. Also, of course, more shocks to come, perhaps from the US and generally geopolitics, I'm sure is what the governor and the other members of the Monetary Policy Committee would say. Either way, though, I think there are going to be more people who are going to say it should have been a 50 basis point cut, and that will lead to more pressure. The bank can withstand pressure. I'm not worried about that. But there will be more pressure to say there needs to be another cut next month. All of that to come as well. I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit more. Good to hear from you. I don't know where you go on the Reserve Bank. 011 883 0702, 021 446 0567, and 072 702 1702.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
More suggestions today that you, as a fan, might be able to buy a stake in the commercial rights of the Springboks. Reports today a new consortium. It involves Altvest Capital, Easy Equities, 274 investment managers, and Rainfin. They want to buy 40% of the Boks commercial rights through a special purpose vehicle. You may remember on Friday, the unions of SA Rugby rejected that proposal from the Ackerley Sports Group. That group does still have exclusivity on this until the end of the year. Carel Nolte is the Chief Marketing Officer at Easy Equities. Carel, good evening to you. Thank you for your time. What kind of deal are you proposing?
Hi, Stephen. Thanks very much for the opportunity to chat to you guys. It's great being here. So Easy Equities is part of this via Altvest, who put this all together. Altvest is a listed company on the stock exchange, and like Easy Equities, has very much as a mission to make investing accessible to everybody. And what better brand to get everybody to invest in than our brilliant Springboks. So simply put, the deal that Altvest, Easy Equities and the other partners proposing would see broad-based ownership It would allow people with no minimums, whether you've got R1 to invest or tens of millions, to own a fraction, a part of the Springboks. And the deal we're proposing, as you say, is taking up to a 40%, but SARU maintaining the majority investment.
Okay, and you would allow other people access to this? How?
Absolutely. I mean, we're very, very inclusive, and I think part of the attraction of this deal, and Warren Wheatley, the CEO of Altvest, has spoken about this, is that there is an opportunity to collaborate even with competing bids. You mentioned the exclusivity until the end of the year, so while SARU have acknowledged and excited about the bid, there's not anything that's going to be happening this year. There might be an RFP next year evaluating bids, etc. But the way that it would work from an Easy Equities perspective, we've got over 2 million registered clients. It would mean that all of them and anybody else in South Africa, quite frankly, would be able to say we want to buy into the Springboks. We want to realize some value out of the commercial rights.
And they would do that through your platform, is the point?
They would do that through our platform. So the consortium has a number of asset managers, so there would be some institutional investment. But the real attraction here is that, and Warren again quoting him, that from the car guard at Loftus to the fan in the Eastern Cape to the administrator of rugby in KZN, all of those people would be able to invest in a brand that they're so passionate about. And ownership really changes things. We're at Easy Equities, and nobody in the history of the world has ever washed a rental car. So ownership really changes how you look at something, and not just being a fan, but a part owner in this iconic brand. And we see more of this in the world of sport already. I mean, Manchester United, you can access and buy through Easy Equities currently. So the Springboks is just the first part of this. I think there'll be many other sports brands that will go down this route in South Africa.
Okay. One of the big sticking points has been the value of the commercial rights, how you assess that value. Do you have a value that you think the commercial rights to the Springboks are worth at this point?
No, I mean, we haven't put a firm price on it. You obviously know the proposal that was put forward by the existing bid and what they've seen in terms of the cash amount, which I think ended up being roughly sort of 600 million rand. And while it seems that there is cash needed for SARU immediately, there's not a huge amount we think that would be required up front. But through the consortium that Altvest have put together, the asset managers, private equity, and what Easy Equities would bring from the retail investors, we see over R1 billion of new cash on our platform every month now. There's certainly an appetite for good investments from retail and institutional investors.
Okay, so you don't think there would be much of a need for money up front for this because there would be a company that would be formed and it would go and basically try and make money out of the Springboks. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I mean, we would make money, or the consortium would make money, through a fee, and that would be kept low. And both the CEO of Easy Equities and Altvest have been quoted on this in the range of 2 to 3% to keep it as low as possible. And so there'd be money made from that. But the real money would come from the investors themselves that would take a stake in this business, and it would grow over time, like any other investment. And I mean, you mentioned the loyalty programs. There are many other initiatives that one could look at and start with the Springboks, particularly at the moment with the brand being so strong.
Sure. What happens if the brand's not so strong? I mean, no team in the history of the world has won 3 consecutive World Cups. Things can happen. I'm not saying they will. I don't think they will. But things can happen. I mean, you can go for Wales just went for an entire season losing every single test match after huge success before with the same team and the same coach. And the idea of ascribing value to a victory or a loss could change the game completely. Things happen in sport. This run, I'm afraid, won't last forever, and that could affect the value. People might want to buy, but find they actually lose quite a lot of money.
So I think it's a great question because, like any investment, it shouldn't just be your heart. People need to do research with any kind of investment, and certainly with something like this Springbok brand. So there'd be a prospectus that we put together by SARU and us, to realize or to explain very clearly what the commercialization would be going forward. So there are existing ways that the Springbok and the Springbok brand makes money now, but there are many ideas that we have in how you could increase the value throughout, and it doesn't just depend on the Springboks winning every single World Cup. Of course, my bias is that we continue doing that, but as you say, there's no guarantee. So the prospectus would show that, and that would be put together quite quickly in the beginning of the year if we get the go-ahead.
Okay. There are other people involved in this, as you say, the Ackley Sports Group. Their period of exclusivity ends at the end of the year. The people who really finance some of the bigger, particularly the big four unions, and these are heavy hitters in business, Carel, you'll know them, they're likely to make their own bid, and they're involved in rugby already, and won't they actually have the inside track? I mean, I think you're going to face a lot of competition, is my point.
Yeah, I'm sure that there would be, but I get back to the word I used earlier, is collaboration. And we've got to do what's best for the brand here and for the fans. And we believe what we bring is mass participation. Easy Equities mentioned 2 million retail clients, and many of them are first-time investors. And so to have a brand like the Springboks, not just controlled by a small group of people, a small group of family members or rich asset managers, to have those people, because certainly they bring value, but to have participation of millions of ordinary South Africans owning this brand, we think that is very, very powerful.
Carel Nolte, thank you very much indeed. Chief Marketing Officer at Easy Equities. All right, your thoughts on that? Would you invest in the Springboks right now? Would you be investing with your heart or your head? 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, more confirmation it seems that we kind of have inflation under control. For the second month in a row, consumer price inflation coming in below the target band of the Reserve Bank. This month, well, November's figure, I should say, 2.9%. October's figure, 2.8%. Koketso Mano is a senior economist at FNB. Koketso, good evening to you. I mean, it would seem the Reserve Bank could have gone for 50 basis points last time, but they didn't.
Good evening, Stephen, and everyone who's listening. The Reserve Bank is proving to do exactly what we expect them to do. They're remaining cautious. The risks are still in the system, unfortunately. This is only the starting point, and they're more concerned about what happens 2 years from now.
Okay, so it doesn't change your view, this new figure?
This new figure doesn't change our view. Yes, it did surprise us to the downside. It did surprise the broader market to the downside. So we expected, inflation to go back within the inflation target band, but we were surprised to the downside, which is a positive thing because it does still influence the starting point that the Reserve Bank is working with. So you would have remembered in the November meeting, they expected 4.5% for this year. 4.4% for next year, and then 2026 is around 4.5%, 4.6%, 4.5% roundabout. So they're not really showing in their forecast that they expect inflation to become problematic at any time within the forecast horizon. The thing that I think will keep them cautious is just going into 2025. What improving domestic demand might entail from an inflation perspective, what's happening at the global level, what that might mean as well. But as it stands right now, the fundamentals suggest that there is still room for cutting interest rates. We just think they're going to do it gradually rather than faster. But the interest rate cuts are still coming.
Okay. A couple of things in the numbers that were fascinating. Food price inflation at its lowest in 14 years. I mean, that's after a high base, after what we've seen during COVID. Food price inflation's been very high for a very long time. But this is still important.
Yes. So I think you're raising one of the two important key takeaways from, the numbers that we received today. One is the high base that was created in 2022-2023 that is now supporting us to see these very low numbers. I mean, food and non-alcoholic beverages inflation at 2.3% is the lowest that we've seen in 14 years. The second thing to take away from the data from today is the monthly deflation. So it's not just a base effect story. We're also seeing that on a month-on-month basis, food prices are coming down, and it was actually quite broad-based. So if you think about vegetables, cereals, dairy and eggs, there was no meat inflation, so that number was zero. So it is quite broad-based that there are these, there is this deceleration in inflation when you look at food inflation, which is very positive for your lower income households, and that to say also did report on that, saying that lower income households are now, settled. The inflation that they experience, at least from the status say perspective, is now below 4%. So it's something that's really positive for the economy.
Egg prices surely are a part of this. There was the avian influenza outbreak. And that obviously increased the price of eggs dramatically. Egg prices were eggs are cheaper now than they were a year ago. And that helps a lot of people.
That is correct. So it speaks to, once again, those positive base effects, right? So at this time last year, we had really high egg prices. We also had that issue with foot and mouth disease that would have affected some of your meat products. So all of that now is translating into a really high base when you compare to last year. And when you compare this year's level to last year's level, you're really getting this soft inflation from on a year-on-year basis. So it is quite positive. But I have to say, Stephen, the way that we also try to, explain these numbers to the general public is that, yes, inflation is slow. It's at around 2.9% on average. Food inflation at 2.3%, but it's still inflation, right? So the rate at which prices are growing is still, it has slowed, but you're still seeing inflation when you compare to last year. What's really important and a very positive dynamic is that even on a month, when you even see monthly deflation, that means on a month-on-month basis when you go to the grocery stores, you see lower prices. That's also something that I think is more important for us to flag rather than the year-on-year numbers.
Koketso Mano, thank you very much indeed. Senior economist at FNB.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Viv Governor is a portfolio manager at Rand Swiss. Viv, good evening to you. I have to say, it seems to me there was space for the Reserve Bank to cut interest rates by 50 basis points after today's inflation figures. How do you feel about it?
Look, I mean, theoretically, you would say yes, there is the ability for the Reserve Bank to cut because our inflation number, though it was up slightly, is still below even 3%, which is, the bottom end of our target range. That being said, in South Africa, we have a very volatile currency relative to the US dollar and other, what we call, stronger emerging market, stronger developed world currencies. And if you do have a surprise of your currency versus another currency, especially when you have, like I said, this volatility and this weakness on our part, you will find that yes, the surprise itself, even though it might in the future be justified, would weaken your currency, causing you to have inflation in the future anyway. And I always talk to people, whenever I talk about the Reserve Bank, I would say, don't just look at it in isolation. Look at it compared to its partners internationally. The one country I use as the example of the opposite of the Reserve Bank is Turkey, or South Africa is Turkey. Look at what the Turkish lira has done over the last few years because that Reserve Bank is trying to buck what the market expects it to do. Look at some of our compatriots in the African continent, Nigeria, Ghana, Egypt, etc., over the last little while. And look at how weak those currencies have been, in that period of time. Whereas the rand has been incredibly strong relative to developed market currencies in the recent few months, and really stable, even though it has weakened, over time, versus things like the dollar, the pound, the euro, and so on, over the last several years. And so I think the stability that comes from the Reserve Bank kind of doing what the market expects, broadcasting its stuff well in advance, and not pulling up any surprises, especially surprises of unexpectedly large rate cuts, has been, really serving the country well.
Barlow World today, ending the day up 15%, Viv. I'm sure you saw it. The consortium, the Middle East consortium, and involving the current CEO, Dominic Sewela, making a bid, putting a huge premium on the share price, and somehow the CEO very much in the middle of it. I mean, a couple of questions around that, I would think.
Oh, yes, most certainly. I mean, you have to wonder, TV is basically working with somebody that's on the opposite side of you because they're going to be basically buying your shares. How well has he served your interest in that period of time? That being said, you usually do have a situation where you have to have some kind of buy-in from, the CEO in a situation like this here, because this is not a mine. This is not an entity you just kind of take over and replace management with, or something where you have an asset you can exploit. This is more a case of, an operational, company that you want to basically continue operating at the same way it is right now. And you need to a certain extent to have the buy-in of management on that going forward. So I do think, in terms of having the CEO involved in this, it kind of would make sense that they would, first approach management before deciding to make such a bid.
China today, suggestions, a report out of Reuters that government in China is considering of weakening the yuan. That would obviously be a response to any kind of tariffs imposed by currently the US President-elect Donald Trump. Be a shock absorber against tariffs. Imagine it would have an impact on us too somehow.
Oh yes, but look, I mean, this would happen naturally anyway. If the yuan was basically trading, freely in the market, and you do have a situation in which the US was imposing sanctions or rather tariffs on Chinese imports, you would find that yuan would weaken anyway, because that would weaken the competitiveness. It will make them export less, having to basically probably lower the price that they're exporting for, etc. And that's something that's going to happen anyway, something like a second, third order effect of having tariffs on the Chinese economy. Obviously, with the fact that the Chinese do control their currency to a large extent than some other countries in the world, they would obviously have to some extent allow this weakening to occur. But look, it makes sense. If you're going to be selling less to the US, or you're facing more barriers to the US, it kind of makes sense that the lack of exports or the drop in exports is going to cause you to basically have a weaker currency.
And then Elon Musk, he's now worth $440 billion US. I mean, I don't think anyone in human history has ever been worth this much.
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously excluding like Chinese emperors and other heads of state. But the private individual, you'd be talking about like the Rockefellers. There was a famous personal figure in medieval Europe. There was a couple of individuals that got really close to this, but I mean, most of the estimates put them at about 300 billion. But this is the first time we see somebody growing past 400 billion. And the two things that caused this was obviously the increase in the valuation of Tesla, which is now also, coincidentally gone past the $400 per share mark, for the first time ever. And I do think that now it's at $412 a share. To give you an idea how impressive this is, basically earlier this year, it was sitting at about $180, $170 a share, which was, I think, at one point even reached $150 a share, and now it's a $1 trillion company. But the big thing also was the revaluation of SpaceX. SpaceX is the rocket company that puts things like Starlink to space and obviously delivers astronauts to the space station. It's not a publicly traded company, so you only get a measure of its valuation when certain events happen. And what happened recently was there was a revaluation event in which some shares were purchased from people that had shares in SpaceX. They put a valuation on that company at about $350 billion. And Elon Musk owns a huge chunk of that. And that's, I think, one of the big drivers that drove him in the last couple of days at least to this $400 billion plus valuation.
Verve Govender, thanks very much indeed. Portfolio manager at Rand Swiss. Really appreciate the time on The Money Show. Bringing the time to just after 6:30.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Good to have you with us on The Money Show this evening. 011-883-0702, 021-446-0567. Would you buy a stake in the Springboks if you could? Lots of talk about that this evening. You heard the conversation with Carel Nolte about that. I don't know, frankly, if it's going to happen. My cynicism suggests that SA Rugby might still just be a little too conservative for that. The other thing, though, and we need to watch this very carefully, is that there are people with a lot of money involved in some of the provincial unions, and I suggest they might somehow, by magic, have the inside track. I do think this is something we need to watch very closely indeed. The focus in Joburg, to an extent, still on the G20 this week, the first big meeting of the foreign affairs officials, often known as Sherpas. From the various reports, it seems our government does have broad buy-in, broad support for most of our plans for our presidency of the G20. I must just say, there are ifs and buts. I mean, the shadow of Donald Trump kind of hangs over the whole thing. Pamela Coke-Hamilton is the executive director of the International Trade Centre. They've been part of the talks with our government, part of the talks around arranging it. Pamela, good evening to you, and thank you for your time. Firstly, I mean, yes, there's a lot of talk about the G20. Does it really have an influence on the economies of the countries that are involved? I think for many people in South Africa, listening to this right now, the whole G20 thing is just very, very distant.
Well, the truth is it shouldn't be. I think for several reasons. One is the very first time that a G20 meeting, which is the 20 biggest countries in the world, 20 biggest economies, are meeting on the continent of Africa. Last year, the African Union was added as the 21st member of the G20, which says several things. It says it opens an opportunity for Africa to showcase its development and also showcase the vision that it has in accordance with Africa, the 2063 agenda. So I think it's a great opportunity, and it also is an opportunity to take advantage of the messaging that can be put forward through President Ramaphosa's vision on economic development, on inequality, on ensuring that there is more youth engagement and employment, as well as on women's economic empowerment.
Okay. I mean, I know you've been talking about talking to our government about, I think, trying to involve small business in all of this.
Yes.
And I mean, yes, of course, we need small businesses to grow in our country. All the G20 countries need that. Is there really an understanding about how important small business is to all of this in all of the G20 countries?
I think, since COVID, there has been a ratcheting up of the appreciation and understanding of what small businesses bring to economies. Prior to that, of course, there's always been the focus on the big multinationals, the big players. But through COVID, it became very clear that the businesses that kept countries going, the businesses that enabled us to adapt, the businesses that were able to make the shift, were the SMEs. The SMEs were the ones who stayed. They were the ones who continued to do work. They were the ones who continued to employ persons. This was why it became so critical to recognize how much SMEs form the basis of economies. In fact, they're 90% of the world economy. They form 90% of all supply chains to the larger companies. And so it's important, I think, and it's emerging that SMEs are a critical force if we're going to talk about economic development and growth.
There's broad consensus on some of the issues, and everyone's going to say they want to reduce inequality, they want to support global trade.
Of course.
Is there broad agreement on gender issues, helping female entrepreneurs? And again, people will say yes. The question is, what will they really do, Pamela? And you probably have a bigger, headache from that than I do.
Yes, you're right. There's a lot of what my son would call performative virtue signaling when it comes to women, right? And women's economic empowerment. But the truth is, the fact that we have now been able to set up an established working group on women and trade in the WTO tells you that there is now an acceptance that this is an issue that needs to be addressed and addressed in a tangible manner. For us, we've done several things. We've set up She Trades hubs across the world. There's a vibrant one here in South Africa under the CEDFA, and it's been really working extremely well through our She Trades program, which works on empowering women, teaching them business, training them on things like labeling and market intelligence, etc. But even more importantly, one of the areas where we think that there can be a huge outcome is the gender responsive public procurement campaign. This campaign, in essence, is having governments agree to carve out maybe 5, 10, 15% of your public procurement market for women-owned businesses. Because right now, it's a $13 trillion a year market, and only 1% goes to women-owned businesses. And so therein lies a clear opportunity to provide a tangible, benefit for women in this space that is controlled by government.
It should be at no cost. All you're doing is you're saying...
Precisely.
I mean, it'll cost governments nobody.
Carving out. That's it.
I wonder if there's going to be a moment of difficulty for South Africa in this, and let me just explain what I mean. South Africa has always been, and President Ramaphosa and this administration and the Minister of International Relations, and I would think all of the members of our current coalition, broadly speaking, are involved and support multilateralism. In other words, we support greater integration, we support more global trade. But I don't know if everyone in South Africa would support further African integration. And there's a dynamic that you see it in North America too. Everyone will say they want more trade, and then the richest country will be the one that doesn't want it, right? As America has just shown. And I think we see the same thing in Southern Africa. It is South Africans who say, that integration can stop at the border. And isn't that going to put us in a little bit of a quandary, I suspect?
This is a challenge that, frankly, is not unique to Africa. We've seen it in the EU. We've seen it, of course, in North America. We've seen it in ASEAN. It is something that is frankly natural. The countries that are the most successful, the most industrialized, the ones who in a way have been pushing ahead, are always a little suspect or a little reticent to pursue an economic or regional integration agreement that they may see as not beneficial necessarily to them. However, one of the things I've been able to point out is that the internal value chain that South Africa can lead, for example, in the context of the EV batteries, simply by pulling together 5 or 6 of the key countries that have the critical minerals, 50% of which are exported to China, only 6% remain in Africa for processing. Why would Africa do that? Why would it not benefit South Africa to build that capacity internally using the supply and value chains within Africa and creating an ecosystem where EV batteries can be built here, processed here, and sold from here, creating jobs, creating income, creating new technology, opening up a wide swath of value chains and opportunities across the board.
It's interesting. I mean, beneficiation, it's been something our politicians have been calling for many years, particularly in mining.
Yes.
I have to talk about Donald Trump. and I would suggest that the G20 is going to come under possibly more strain next year during our presidency. Yes. I would suggest further, and I won't be entirely popular with everyone in our country for saying this, that President Ramaphosa is almost exactly the perfect person to support multilateralism at this time, because he firmly believes in it, and he's a man of vast political experience. I would suggest keeping the G20 and the system of multilateral trade just alive this time a year from now might in itself be a victory.
Let's put it this way. I'm a little more optimistic than you. I think that, yes, keeping it alive, of course, will be a victory. But I do think that there are more coming to the table with desire for movement, a desire for movement in changing the terms of trade internationally, a desire for movement in enabling greater movement on, for example, the green transition and clean tech and green energy, for moving on the digital divide and ensuring that there is, kind of gaining more equality among countries and within countries on this. So I think that there are movements that can be made that don't necessarily have to be interrupted or affected by what we anticipate may be a difficult year.
Pamela, I hope you're right. Thank you very much indeed. Really enjoyed really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you. Pamela Coke-Hamilton is Executive Director of the International Trade Centre.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB. Honored to be awarded the best trade finance bank in Africa at the Asian Banker Middle East and Africa Finance Awards 2024.
Well, an important moment today in quite a strange saga involving Google. I think you've heard of them. And another company you might have heard of. They're called Lottoland. They're an online bookmaker. They basically allow what's called fixed odds betting on national lotteries in various countries. Now, Google has refused to allow them to advertise on Google. Lottoland claimed they lost revenue of over 69 million rand as a result. Today, the Competition Tribunal releasing its reasons as to why it's ordered Google to continue to allow Lottoland to advertise. Jan Vermeulen's the editor of My Broadband. Jan, good evening. This is such a strange story. There are plenty of betting companies advertising on Google, and it still doesn't seem clear why they said no just to Lottoland.
Yeah, I've also been scanning the reasons document, so unfortunately we haven't really heard the full facts of the case being ventilated. This was an interim order only. But, on face value, it really just seems like Google systems picked up something in whatever Lottoland was doing, automatically flagged it, and revoked Lottoland's certification to advertise these lottery betting things that it runs, and while still allowing every other bookmaker in the country to do the same thing. And obviously the competition tribunal found against that and said that Google should stop and allow Lottoland to continue advertising or ban everyone equally.
I mean, if it was just slippage, surely Google would say, "We're very sorry, we shouldn't have done it," and fix it immediately. But that hasn't been their attitude.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be that they're sticking to their guns, that Lottoland violated its policies somehow. But the competition tribunal was not convinced in this case.
There's another aspect to this which I find very interesting. So Lottoland says they've lost money, right? They're very specific. I had to write it out. It's 69,077,665 rand and 24 cents. I mean, how on earth could they prove such a specific amount of money? And this gets to the heart of how online advertising really works.
Yeah, so that is awfully confident, and it certainly points to that they know exactly what their return on investment on Google Ads is and how important Google Ads is to their business, because they know that, for X amount of spend on Google, they get Y amount of revenue. And that number is probably based on some historical performance and projections and so on. So it might not be 100% accurate, but certainly it points to just how specific and how well measured digital advertising is, and how specific you can be with your ROI. Certainly a lot more specific than in the physical advertising space.
Well, I mean, it also just shows you how much money Google is making and how much money people are making off Google. I mean, clearly people are advertising with Google because it works. And I mean, whether it's Lottoland, big corporates who are advertising all over the place, or, as I've heard around the braai, people, running a one-person company who say, well, if you don't know what you're doing, then I advertise on Google because it works. I mean, clearly it does.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason Temu and Shein to a lesser extent, but Temu made a big splash, I think it's over the last 2 years or so. It's obviously ruffled feathers here in South Africa, but also in the United States, just by the sheer amount of online advertising it's done, and specifically ads in Google Shopping. And I mean, if Google didn't work, there wouldn't be these big fights over its dominance in the space.
Jan Vermeulen, thank you very much indeed. Editor at mybroadband.co. Really do appreciate the time. Lots of questions there about online advertising, how it works, and then what on earth Google is doing to Lottoland.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, I hope that you are going away from probably Friday. Every year there is a sort of Friday, that's the year a lot of people stop working. Not everybody, but most people stop working. And this year it's Friday the 13th. Last year it was the Siya Kolisi public holiday, you may remember, because we won the World Cup. And, sometimes it's the 16th, always around this time. Have you worked out yet how you're actually going to rest? That's different from what you're going to do on holiday or where you're going. I mean, how you're actually going to rest. Really, actually, chill. Not as easy as it sounds. We'll speak to an expert on that for you in just a moment. It's 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB. They're honored to be awarded the best trade finance bank in Africa at the Asian Banker Middle East and Africa Finance Awards 2024. Good to have you along with us on the program. Obviously been talking about business and finance and international trade and the Springboks in the last hour. After all of that, maybe you've deserved a little break just to sort of rest. We will speak to Siphiwe Moyo, the organisational behaviour expert, just about how you actually do that over the Christmas holiday. And frankly, it's not as easy as it sounds. I know people who've come back from holidays many a time, and maybe it's happened to you, so I'm actually more exhausted than I was when I left. It can just happen. We'll talk about that in the next little while. We'll also find out more about receipts while shopping. Wendy Nola, a finger on the pulse as usual. And then Sheldon Tatchell, the founder of Legends Barbershop. You might well have had your hair cut at one of them. He's coming in. He's your shapeshifter this evening. And just talk about how he got into the business, how it started, how it became so big, all of that sort of thing. But the story he has to tell is just extraordinary. Looking forward to speaking to Sheldon Tatchell from just after 7:30 this evening on The Money Show.
The Money Show.
Business Unusual.
When you went on holiday, before you had a cell phone and before you had a laptop and before there was cell phone and mobile coverage everywhere, did you feel more relaxed then than you do when you go on holiday now? And, do you try and actually have 2 cell phones on holiday? One for you, one to just play music off, get messages from your family, and one that is for business people if they need it. I don't know how much you've thought about this going into the holiday season, because it can become absolutely impossible to actually try and rest and relax nowadays. You can go away, be in a lovely place, and then, you look at WhatsApp just once and it's pretty much the end of your holiday. Well, Siphiwe Moyo is an organisational behaviour specialist, and she joins us now. Siphiwe, good evening to you. Thanks very much indeed for your time tonight. It's one thing to go away. You need to actually be detached from work. You use the phrase psychological detachment. What is that?
Yeah, Stephen, it's interesting because psychological detachment is something that people study and they try to figure out why sometimes people would go over, maybe leave work on Friday and come back on Monday feeling like they haven't rested at all, because mainly they haven't detached. So psychological detachment, therefore, means mentally disconnecting from work. So you're not thinking about tasks, you're not thinking about deadlines or responsibilities when you're away. I think it's one of those things that is very essential for recovery, because I think if you think about it, our minds always have intrusive thoughts and they really need breaks in order to process whatever stress we might have had, to restore, to focus. So this idea of always on culture that we've always have, unfortunately leads to burnout. And without that detachment, even time off really doesn't feel restful, because the brain remains in this work mode, which is very, very important for maintaining long-term productivity and well-being. So as we think about many people leaving work, some people take work mentally with them even when they're on holiday.
I would imagine the more important you are in an organization, the older you get, let me put this a better way, the more responsibility you have at work, the harder it is to detach. If you're just someone who needs to rock up for a shift, and you could do that shift anywhere, it doesn't matter. But if you're actually managing if you're responsible for people, then it really does matter. Then it does matter. It's harder to detach.
It's harder to detach the more responsibilities you have. That's why I think one of those, when I wasn't a manager, one of the things I used to say is that, these managers, they don't work. They actually just attend meetings all day, until you become a manager and you understand the heavy burden that those managers and leaders and CEOs have, because they just struggle to detach. You have so much responsibility. There's a huge burden on your shoulders. There are some decisions that need to be made. And so you struggle. I think the more senior you are, the more you struggle to detach, the more responsibility you have, whether it's people or whether it's financial resources you have, you struggle to detach. But also, interestingly, the more you love your work, the more you struggle to detach. So if you really don't have an emotional attachment to your work, you detach quite easily. And which is strange for people, because people who understand, who feel like I love my work, they get a sense that I'm not working at any given time, but you are. As long as that burden is in you, you are working and you're not detaching, which is bad for your recovery.
How do you know if you've truly detached?
I think you kind of know you are fully detached, particularly when you start having a bit of mental clarity. So, for example, sometimes during holidays, you get that niggling feeling that there's something that you haven't done, that niggling worry that there's something that you have to do. Once you have detached, you stop thinking about those things, and by the time you come back from work, you start missing work again. You start feeling the same desire to, if you are Stephen Grootes, you miss the mic again. And this is one of those things that happen when you take proper rest. You start feeling, I miss my work again. And many people get to a point where they never even miss their work. It's because, unfortunately, they don't detach when they are not at work.
It's getting the appetite. You need to regain the appetite for something.
Absolutely.
You describe 7 types of rest. Why are they different from just taking time off?
I think they're different because many of us are mindless about how we spend our holidays, and therefore we are not able to detach properly. I think the 7 types of rest, which has been studied so much, is about sometimes you feel like you are burnt out, but as we've spoken about before, burnout can come from your physical, can come from emotional, can also come from our mental bandwidth. So physical rest, which is number 1, is about just sleeping and relaxing and having gentle activities, right? But mental rest is an interesting one because sometimes, even though you could be resting physically, you can get to a point where your mind is too busy. So you need something which is actively trying to rest mentally, which means you have to get something that gives you the so-called flow or mindfulness, journaling. Those are the things that make you to detach mentally. Sensory rest is about detaching from the overstimulation of screens, noise, lights, and so on, which is why many people go to the bush to get that kind of sensory rest. Creative rest means rejuvenating through art, nature, and music. Emotional rest is about reducing your emotional labor and getting into things that refill your emotional tank. Social rest is about spending time with people who energize you. And a spiritual rest, I guess, it's reconnecting with something higher, something bigger than you, whether it's through prayer, meditation, or community. So studies have shown, Stephen, that the more of those types of rest you include, the more detachment you have. So many people, for example, if you use your entire weekend to numb through scrolling and watching Netflix, you might be physically resting, but you're not benefiting from all these types of rest, and therefore you come back from work or come back from vacation, and you need vacation to recover from your vacation.
So you suggest we need lots of different types of rest in one holiday. You need to do a bit of activity, social stuff. You need to do it all, basically.
Absolutely. And I think many of us, because we have certain things that we are more inclined to do. The tip that I would have is to maybe assess your own rest deficits. So, for example, if you're generally a social being, you're probably going to lean in definitely to that social rest to a point where your social battery is overstimulated. So you want to identify which type of rests you are generally lacking. Is it the physical, emotional, creative, and so on, and target those specifically. But if you want, you have to think about all those types of rest, and then create some boundaries and make sure that you are not always on. You put that phone away. If you are in a company where there's an expectation to be always on, create those boundaries, such as not checking emails all the time and planning intentional activities. I find that staying in the house for me does not help my rest, because then I'm thinking about the laptop, I'm thinking about an idea for the segment again. So I have to be very intentional about activities that will align with those rests. I have to go out for a nature walk. I have to intentionally spend time with other people. Otherwise, I don't feel unplugged. And because I don't feel unplugged, I don't feel recharged when I go back to work.
Does activity matter? And you sort of answered the question, but let me just put an example to you. Someone said to me once, they enjoy mountain biking because when you're mountain biking down a trail, if you are not spending all of your brain activity thinking about how you're going to survive, you won't survive, and therefore you can't think about work. I thought that was very interesting. It hasn't been my experience, actually, that often on an easy trail, I'll find thoughts about work intrude for the first hour, and then they start to fade away. And that's when I know I'm resting.
Oh, absolutely. I think the example that someone said to you is absolutely spot on, because what we are trying to find, Stephen, is what are some of the activities that get me into this idea of flow? So flow is something that psychologists study a lot, and it's that activity that when you do, you are just fully ingrained into that activity, that time just passes by, and it takes a long time for many of us to get into flow. So, for example, in that first hour, you might find that your mind wanders, but you then get into flow and you are fine. Some people get into flow quite quicker. Some people need something that is fully engaging to get into flow. I find reading fiction, which I'd always thought is a waste of time, I now find reading fiction and a story that takes me into a totally different world where I have to concentrate. It's like there are just too many characters. You lose concentration and you've lost the plot. That when you are fully concentrating, then the less chance that you'll have these thoughts about work intruding. So it's about finding some of those activities. And because we're living mindlessly, many of us are not even sure what those are. So a quick activity that we would have to do is that you have to just think about what are the 3 activities that when you do, you lose track of time, and lean into those activities.
Do you need to be quite clear about how you're going to incorporate this into your, over the holiday season, you can look at trying to incorporate some of this into the rest of your life?
Yeah, I think it's something that we should incorporate into the rest of our lives, Stephen, because this idea, the mistakes that many of us make is that you work so hard for the first 11 months of the year. You're not taking any leave. You're not recovering properly. You are not intentional about detachment into a place, and you wait for this one time in December, which where you stop work completely. But then again, you go back to work and you are fully engraved. So it's something that we have to intentionally create into our activities, and understand that we should be interested in how we recover. And interestingly, even in the workplace, I argue that leaders have to be interested about the rest period, to whether people are able to rest properly. And sometimes you create some intentional activities on what people can do if you realize that they are not able to detach properly, because we should be interested, because what we know is that the outcomes that we want, even in the workplace, around creativity, innovation, are compromised when people are not emotionally and psychologically detaching when they're not at work.
Siphiwe, we have Thabo on the line from Tshwane. Thabo, how's it? You've got a question about this. Go for it.
Yes. I actually, a complete detachment of business leaders, managers, supervisors, and the like. Is it going to be viable? Is it going to be possible? Because definitely some of them, you realize that they're using social media to actually run the business, and then they have to check emails every morning or afternoon or whatever time of the day. So when you completely want to rest and you want to move away from the workplace and everything, does it include you have not to check your emails and everything? Doesn't that pose a threat to your work?
No, sure. Good question, Thabo. Siphiwe, I mean, it's a great question, and it shows you the reality many people are faced with.
It does. I think, Thabo, if you have people reporting to you, you've got to give people a bit of autonomy, decision-making powers in order to free yourself from doing those things. Assuming maybe that you are probably an entrepreneur and you don't have senior people who can get to that level, you then have to be a little bit more intentional. So you don't have to have a complete ban of your devices, but you have to be a little bit intentional about, I'm going to unplug from this, and at a certain given time, for 30 minutes, I'm going to plug in a little bit, do whatever I need to do, and then completely switch off. I think the problem is when you are just doom scrolling on your phone forever, and therefore you are not feeling recharged. So you don't have to then go to the complete extreme, but you have to be just very intentional about how you structure your different types of rest.
Siphiwe, thank you. Siphiwe Moyo is an expert on organizational behavior. You do actually have to try quite hard to rest sometimes. 21 minutes after 7.
The Money Show.
Consumer Ninja.
Of course, Wendy Nola is your Consumer Ninja. She joins us now. Wendy, good evening. A lot of people spending a lot of time in shops. A lot of us spending a lot of time in shops at the moment. You used to always get a receipt. Now you have to give in your email address. Is that really something that you can do? I mean, can companies force you to give over your email address? And partly because I've always wanted to keep the receipt in case the company won't accept a return.
Exactly. So the short answer to that is no, you don't have to accept it. They can give you a choice and say, I know Mr. Price says, can we email you the receipt? And it happened to me only once. I didn't get it. So I just say, no, I'd like it in my hand. Please print one out, and they do it. But I had I saw a post, a social media post in my neighborhood, Somerset West, where someone had said there was the store called Levisa, which is nationwide. In fact, it's global costume jewelry kind of store. They'd gone in there and they were told, no, we can't give you a paper receipt. You must give us your email address. We haven't got paper. And I checked it out myself, picked out a pair of Christmassy earrings. I stood in the queue at the weekend, and there was a large keyboard. Please put your email address. I said, no, I don't want to do that. Give it to me. No, we can't, no paper. So I took it up with the head office, and they said, oh, no, we're supposed to give customers a choice. We'll fix it up. And they have. The point is that and I've checked this out with the Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman, you can't be, the Act says you've got to be given a written receipt. You can't be forced to give up your personal information, i.e. your email address, in order to get proof of purchase. Because you imagine, and I've had reports of this, that then you just get spammed because now they've got your email address. So it's not fair to do that. The Massmart Group, Builders and Macro, they have many people's details anyway, and they will automatically send you an email receipt via email, but you get the printed one in the store as well.
I mean, I once went into a very well-known store to buy something, and they asked for my cell number, and I just said no, and they said, well, we won't sell it to you then, and I said, that's fine.
What?
And I walked out.
Definitely not
no,
okay.
Go away.
Definitely not okay. One store, it was actually Cape Union Mart. I went to buy something and they said, what's your cell number? So I said, I'm not giving you my cell number. Why do you need it? No, it's for loyalty. I said, but you've never told me about a loyalty program. You should start with that and give me the choice. So yeah, you don't need to give any personal details if you're buying, if you're buying on credit, obviously, but if you're buying cash, no. Strangely, Stephen, the Act, when you want to return something, whether it's defective, in which case you're entitled to your choice of a refund, replacement, or repair within 6 months, you definitely have to produce proof of purchase to get that choice, to exercise your right to that warranty. But funnily enough, the Act doesn't say that. The legislators were, I think, asleep when it came to this section, half asleep. But the Consumer Commissioner said, obviously, the retailer has the right to know when you bought it and where and what you paid and all of that. And so yes, you do need your receipt for that. So make sure you get a receipt, whatever way works for you. But something that did occur to me, I mean, obviously, if you're having it emailed to you, you can't lose your receipt, right? So when you need it, you've got it. So there is that. But, and another reason, something that just I've discovered recently is that, and somebody copied me a TikTok link where this chap is saying, oh, you mustn't, he's like not touching the receipt in a store. He said, you mustn't touch it because that thermal slips, that ones we all get, contain bisphenol A or bisphenol S, which is BPA, BPS that most of us have heard of, which are chemicals that can be harmful to human health if absorbed through the skin, and it absorbs through the skin much easier than it does if we're consuming it, apparently, and it can lead to obesity, attention disorders, reproductive system problems. And when I read that, I thought this is probably just one of those alarmist TikTok things, not based on any science. But actually, when I Googled it and I got a scientist friend of mine to check it out, there is substance. He said, I spent an hour doing research and I can confirm that this is a great risk, particularly to cashiers working with ATM slips, because it absorbs through skin quite easily. So I will be pursuing that with various retailers. I did go to one massive one, South African retail, and it's just not on their radar, never heard of it, whatever. We'll look into it. So I'm going to be looking at this in the new year. But it's for that reason, I don't want to be spread alarm, but Google it if you're interested. So maybe in that sense, if you get offered the choice of an emailed slip, take it. Otherwise, take a photograph of the slip. We all got our phones on us. Save it in a special folder. You'll always have your slip. And also, those thermal slips often fade to just about nothing, barely legible before our warranties expire. So that is the downside also with the thermal slip. And that's probably more than you ever wondered about slips,
Yes.
Stephen. But there you go. The whole story wrapped up for Christmas.
Wendy Nola, thank you very much indeed. Your consumer ninja. Fascinating, actually, just to look at it. And I'm sure it's something that happens to you often. You know, do you take the slip? Do you take the email? What do you do when they spam you? They always promise that they won't, and then they do. In a moment, Sheldon Tatchell, founder of Legends Barbershop. There was one, now there's 70. They're across Southern Africa. We'll find out how he did it. Also, does he miss actually, having a razor or some scissors in his hands and actually at work with a client? I don't have much hair for him to practice on, I'm afraid. 7:30.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Lots of different people that we've spoken to over the last few months, but I can't think of any of them who's actually really changed things by cutting hair, barbering, whatever you want to call it. Sheldon Tatchell is someone who's done that, and he's the founder of Legends Barbershop. They have 70 branches across Southern Africa, because they're actually in other countries. And he's in our studio now. Sheldon, good evening. Thanks so much for coming in.
And thanks for having me on the show, Stephen.
So it started in Eldos for you, right?
That's correct.
What kind of community were you growing up in? And the country was changing while you were growing up, if I've got your age right.
Yeah. So I'm still very young. I think I would consider myself very young. I'm 35 years old. And yeah, I grew up in Eldorado Park, a community that is resilient, to say the least, despite all the challenges. For me, growing up around gangsterism and drug dealers was a norm. I never knew any better. And I stumbled on entrepreneurship at a very young age. I can remember at the age of 12 years old being able just to get spending from my parents, like 2 rand a day. And saving that up and going to the local cash and carry and buying a box of ice cream, which costed 20 rand, and came home and decided to sell that door by door. And that's the fondest memory that I can hear as myself as an entrepreneur. And I think barbering just came about later on, at the age of 14 years old, when I saw an opportunity to actually sell my time, because you're a teenager and you have so much time on your hands, and you're like, okay, you know what, if I can get clippers and I can cut X amount of hair in a day, that means that I am able to earn an income. And I learned this skill by visiting different barbers in my community, and sometimes the guys would chase me away, and I'll just return the next weekend with a bottle of Korea as a bribe for my next lesson. But that was how I actually learned how to cut hair at the age of 14 years old. And with this, I came home, used to give free haircuts to all the school kids, and eventually I begged my father to actually get me clippers, because that was my friend's clippers. So I begged my father to get me for Christmas, to think about it, and instead of Christmas clothing, and he got me clippers, and that's where the journey initially started out at the age of 14 years old.
So, I mean, there are people in Eldos who remember you selling them ice cream and then selling haircuts, and now probably still go to one of your branches.
Yes. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think that might have been the time when I started out on a stoop in Eldorado Park. So just to paint you the story, Stephen, so when I matriculated, my parents didn't have money for me to go to varsity, and so my cousin had an internet cafe in Eldorado Park, and I then asked him if I can make use of his stoop to mimic a pop-up barber. And he agreed with the condition that I only come on weekends, and I was working at Standard Bank at the time and always dreamed of becoming a barber. And I started out back in 2011, around July. All I had was a clipper and a chair, nothing else.
Sure.
And a speaker as well.
Can't do it without that.
No, you can't do it without the music. So the music has to be there. And I started out and I saw I'm actually gaining a lot of traction, that people kept on coming to me, and I always wondered what makes me so special. I mean, right across the road there's a barber from me, right across the road from him there's another barber. what makes me so special? And I went across the road to go see what that barber is doing. And I then realized that for them, it was much more of a money transaction. I cut your hair, next customer done. And one thing that I think that stood out for me more than anything else was not the skill, but it was the way of building relationships.
Yeah.
And how I done this was I had a notebook and a pen, and I would write down your name. If I'm cutting Stephen today, I would write down his name and the conversation that we're having. So next week you can sit on my chair and I would make reference to that conversation. And people felt a sense of belonging to their barber. And I think that for me was the game changer, being able to live out those type of relationships. And okay, so on the stoop itself, so things began to pick up. And as I had a friend that could also cut hair. I shook hands with him and I told him, from today, you're my partner. Please.
So this was going to be my next question.
Yes.
Do you remember the first person you worked with, or your first employee, whatever you called them?
Yeah, so I got a friend of mine. He could also cut hair. And I told him, okay, let's shake on this. From today, you're my partner. And we then moved into an unleased premises, not far away from where the stoop was. It's about a 30 square meter space. And we moved into the space, just the two of us. We launched on the 1st of September 2011, which was on a Saturday. And when we launched, we then saw there's actually a lot of traction this barbershop is creating. And it was just called the barbershop, nothing else. We got guys in from the community to come and assist us, train them up. On our quiet days, which was Tuesdays and Wednesdays, we went out to old age homes and to schools. We done this as a way of empowering the barbers that we got. But we actually saw this as making a difference.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed actually going out to the old age home so much that we then decided to name the barbershop after them, because they're the legends of our community. And that's the reason it's called Legends Barber.
I just want to go back a little bit. So when you were first selling ice creams, was there anyone... So I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs start like you when they're young. And there often isn't... I mean, sometimes there is a sort of family thing. Sometimes there isn't. Most often there actually isn't. Was there any kind of entrepreneurial instinct in your family or history? Or was it just... I mean, sometimes you can see this person... You know, I've met some kids who are like 10. I'm like, this guy's going to make money.
Yes. Unfortunately, that wasn't my case. Both my parents were working. And at that particular moment when I saw an opportunity to actually do these activities in my community, it was a time where both of them weren't working. And I felt the responsibility to actually want to make a difference and to bring money home. And you can imagine at such a young age, you're doing all this and you're taking all this pressure upon yourself. But I think it helped me so much because I learned so much from that particular journey, being able to have the know-how in terms of selling.
Okay, so you've got people of your community, they're coming in, you're going to the old age homes, everybody starts to know you, you've got a partner, you've got people coming in. So you're operating from this one space, right? And there you can, and you can keep control, you can keep tabs on that one space. You're there all the time, I presume, by then. By now you've got to open a second branch. Where was the second branch?
So not to go so far, Bruce.
That's the first time in a month, by the way. It's a new record. It's quite all right. Plenty of people have made the mistake.
Sorry, Stephen. So funny enough is that about a couple of months later, on the 4th of December, I got married. And when I got married, this partner of mine showed me, it's fine, go away on honeymoon. I got everything under control. I then trusted his words and went away on 6 days honeymoon. When I came back, the doors were closed. And to my surprise, I'm like, okay, what's happening here? This is like first, because December, it's our peak. I called him, he never answered his phone, but I called one of the guys that was working there, and he explained to me that he never paid the rent, but to make matters worse, he never paid them as well, because it was very informal, Stephen. I mean, the guys used to get paid on a daily basis commission, and that just left a bitter, like a bitter taste in my mouth, just to not go at it again. And I mean, standing in front of those closed doors, decided, you know what, I shouldn't have done this, and continued working in the bank, and decided I'm going to leave barbering right there and then.
That's not the end of the story.
And that's not the end of the story.
Something else happened after that.
Yeah,
It's
something
the end
else.
of the second act.
Yes. So I always have this thing, like if you have a calling, it will definitely come after you.
Yeah.
And I felt like the calling was just knocking on my door for the longest time. And I gave into it. This was around 2013. So picture this. I got myself a scooter while working at Standard Bank. So I worked from 8 to 4, and from 5 I had free time. Weekends I was available. And I decided on the scooter to go out to customers, and driving out to customers, being able to cut their hair, and this just brought a lot of self-confidence in order for me to restart my business. The following year, on the 26th of July, I then relaunched Legends Barber, and when I relaunched, the goal was basically to have 5 stores in 5 years, and we put up this massive drive. And also when we relaunched, a week later, I then tendered my resignation at the bank, and I told my manager, you know what, I'm leaving to become a barber. And he laughed at me and he was like, who does that?
Sheesh.
But I never looked back from there, and I think it's been an interesting journey ever since.
Okay, so round 2. So now you start one shop. You've been selling on your thing. Where was the second shop? Where was the new shop?
So the second shop. So the first store that we relaunched was in the El Dorado Park, and from there we opened in Florida, which was exactly a year later. The plan was to have to use profits of the store and constantly just grow. And what then happened was it became like a snowball effect, because the more profits you gain, the more you're able to scale your business. And that became to a point where we reached 5 stores around 3.5 years. And by year 2019, we were standing on 9 stores.
Sure.
And
so I just want to ask, because at this point, you now have to trust someone else to run the store. Then you've been burnt badly, bro. I mean, before.
Yes.
So who was the person you let run the second store? I mean, were they part of your family? Because I would have done that.
No. So I think I was, I mean, the journey in between, there's been a lot of hiccups as well.
Sure.
As you know, you trust in people, and people tend to disappoint you. I'll make an example, like the time when we just reached our 5th store. So when we reached our 5th store, I then decided to give one of the guys that was so loyal to me, I gave him a percentage in our store and gave him like a 50% share of the profits. And I said, you know what, you're going to be the biggest shareholder. A couple of years later, he then turned around and he was like, you know what, he's going to pursue his own thing. So I said, okay, no problem. You can go and go start your own business. You have you have thumbs up from me. You can just leave everything and just go and start. But what this guy actually done was he turned around and he actually wanted to tarnish the whole business. So we went through a phase. As soon as we reached that amount of stores, we went through a phase where we had to close down stores. And to the public, it was, you know what, we're going through a restructuring process and stuff. But this was one of the toughest phases, where this guy literally took guys from all our stores.
Sure.
And I can imagine you don't have staff at your stores, and they're all following this guy because he had that power of him. Just had like this whole charisma just to tell the guys, you know what, we are going to overpower Legends. So it was, I think that was one of the toughest challenge after we relaunched, and being able to recover from that was Sheldon going back into the store, Sheldon cutting hair, Sheldon being able to upskill barbers again, and just going through that restart process. And you know what, I think the feeling that you get when you feel like you're going backwards is the most dreadful feeling, because failure is one thing, but to fail and you understand that, you know, you're actually losing out and you're not progressing and you're rather regressing. I think that feeling was just upon us, but I just tried to stay optimistic as possible, and eventually we managed to grow our training development academy, and they basically just just helped us in terms of our barbers, and we managed to scale accordingly. So I think there's a lot of those tests that I can testify, but obviously it hasn't been easy. It hasn't been the smoothest ride. But funny enough that by year 2019, standing on 9 stores, I then decided, you know what, I'm unable to do this on my own, so I need to do something. So,
I'm going to ask you about how you built that trust. That's coming up next. Also, a shapeshifter's worst question. What do you do for fun? Sheldon Tatchell's the founder of Legends Barbershop. More from him in a moment.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Sheldon Tatchell's your shapeshifter tonight, the founder of Legends Barbershop. So, Sheldon, you've been through periods of really rough places, and to build a business, you would have to trust the people that you work with. How did you build that trust with the people you work with now, the people who manage your branches?
No, thank you very much. I think that's such a vital question. And, you know, trust is such a vital component in teams. And I think being able to find good people, there's definitely good people out there to start out. And being able to empower them with the right skill set that they needed. And I think that's something that I've learned over course in time is once people are able to trust you as a leader and the vision that you cast for your business, then it will be much better for people to actually align as to the goals of your company. So then what we then done was just going back to the story back in 2019 when we started franchising our business. Our first franchise that actually opened a new store was a guy by the name of Ricky Rick and Bianca, his wife.
Remember Ricky Rick, of course.
Yes. So being able to hand over the trust to him, and it was quite tough because I've been burned so many times, but I think franchising has literally allowed for being able to not only put systems and standard operating procedures in place, but to ensure that that your business is well protected and any misharm can actually bypass it.
Sheldon, I want to ask you some questions about yourself, and it's a running joke on this segment that the CEOs are very nervous of the question, what do you do for fun? And everybody wants to spend time with their family. Of course they want to spend time with their family. So what do you like to do for fun? Hang gliding, paragliding, swimming in the ocean. There's a dolphin, you know.
No, I mean, I started playing golf a year and a half ago, and I'm really enjoying it. It's just
I'm so sorry to hear that.
But the problem is, Stephen, my handicap is not going anywhere. So golf has been the one thing that just takes my mind off things.
You have people you golf with regularly, you talk stuff over, talk nonsense with. I used a different word off the radio.
Yes.
Just generally.
Yeah, so there's definitely, and I think being able to spend 4 hours with a person on a golf course and being able to actually assess this person's character, I think that's quite interesting. So it's exactly like life.
It's amazing how much of a glue golf can be.
Yes.
Do you miss the cutting of the hair at all? You do, hey?
Yeah. So I've taken a back step, and it's because now you're building this business and you're building on different elements of the business. So just to give you context, that we have our own product line as well that's really doing well in retail chains. So we're constantly innovating and listening to customers, listening to the demand that actually people want out there. And this has taken much of my time being able to do all of these things, and while ensuring that our community on the other end, the needs are being met from the community, because you never want to implement something that's not product market fit. So that's been one of my massive tasks at hand, is being able to do all of those things. But cutting hair has always been one of those things, and whenever I have an opportunity to cut hair, I'll definitely grab it.
When you you run 70 branches now. I don't know. I mean, at some point there will be someone who also sold ice cream, at a young age, and they will try and compete with you. And there are lots of different ways. I mean, everyone says, barbering, haircutting, barbershops is one of those trades that's going to stay with us forever, right? I mean, AI can't do that. Google, good luck to you. Fine. But trends change, the tools that people use change, the kind of haircut people want change. I don't think what they want from their barber will change. I also go to the same person. During COVID, I had to track him down, and during level of the pandemic, he actually came to my house because, I needed to see him, not just because I wanted to cut it. I wanted to see if he was all right. And he was quite hilarious on the subject. But, so that personal relationship's really important. People go to the same place all the time.
Yes.
Men and women, interestingly,
Yes, that's true.
But you do need to be aware of trends.
Yes.
I mean, are there certain things that you've seen that actually, I need to be aware of this. I need to be able to make sure my people can cut hair like that.
No, of course. I think that's quite vital, and I think trends comes with innovation. But one thing that we do is basically listening to your customer. I think that's critical. Then the following thing is listening to the barbers that's on the ground, because they are the ones that could assess exactly what's the next thing going around. And once you're able to put the 2 and 2 together, you are able to at least provide a product market fit for the needs of your customer or for the needs of your community. And that allows us to actually be one step ahead. It's interesting enough, Stephen, I just want to share this with you. So I started out a hair clipper business on the side as well.
Sure.
So it actually falls under the Legends Barber group as well. But it's this t-shirt I'm wearing. It's the Freight Company. So we're doing equipment for barbers for them to actually have their own African brand clipper that will be able to service the needs of their customer. And it's coming back to actually listening to what's needed out there. These are the type of initiatives that we see fit in order to grow our industry, because if we don't take the step ahead, no one else will.
Sheldon, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming in tonight.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, Stephen.
Sheldon Tatchell, remember the name, founder of Legends Barbershop, your shapeshifter this evening.